I thought I'd give you my top 13 tips about chess. Tip number 1. You can learn from almost every game and everyone. Play against people from all different levels, at different time controls, from all around the world. Tip number 2, my best tip of all. Challenge yourself by playing against the Play Magnus app. Tip number 3, take regular breaks from chess, train your body as well as your mind. Tip number 4, now it would appear that I have to go back on naming tip number 2 the most important one, because this is the most important one. Have fun playing chess. Tip number 5, expand your horizons. Try different openings, different ways of playing in order to broaden your understanding of the game. Tip number 6, challenge your brain with other puzzles. It will improve your problem solving skills. Tip number 7, get enough sleep. From when I was young till the age I'm now, I always try to get at least 9 hours of sleep every day when I'm playing tournaments. It's vital to keep a clear head. Tip number 8, eat and drink well. My favorite drink while playing is orange juice mixed with water, as probably most of you know. Tip number 9, learn from watching others. I have put a few movies in the app that you can learn from. Tip number 10, sit at the chessboard and play against yourself. It will improve your feel for the game. Tip number 11, study past players. Learn from their games and incorporate their techniques into your own play. Tip number 12, fight till the end. Never give up, whether you're playing for a win or fighting for a draw. Tip number 13, chess takes practice, don't give up.
Endgames are the most decisive part of the game, so hopefully this will help you get some wins. Tip number 1. If you are down material, try to avoid trades and getting into an endgame. Vice versa, if you're up material, try to trade and get into an endgame. Let me give you an example to make it more obvious. In this position, white is up a pawn, so the correct plan is to try to trade off all of the pieces possible, because material advantage is much more important in the endgame. Usually in king and pawn endgames, if you're up just one pawn, you can win the game. That brings me to rule number 2. It's usually very useful if you can create a pass pawn. Pass pawn is a pawn that cannot be stopped by any enemy pawn on its route to promotion. So if there was a pawn either on a7, b7, or c7, this would not be a pass pawn. The pawn on f3 is not a pass pawn because the pawn on g7 is blocking its path. Pass pawns are very useful plans in the endgame because you're trying to promote to a piece that has more value. So how do we use that in our initial exercise? That brings me to rule number 3, which is creating a passed pawn from a pawn majority. In this position, we have 3 pawns versus black's 2 pawns on the king side. So what you're trying to do is somehow trade one of them off so that you create a passed pawn. I'll go forward a few moves to show that idea. So let's say you start marching your pawn towards where you want to trade it. The kings are always active in endgames, and eventually you're able to trade one of your pawns, and now we have a passed pawn. I'll quickly show you how white would win this endgame just because it applies to a lot of other positions as well. When you're up a pawn in a king and pawn endgame, and it's a passed pawn, what you can usually do is make your opponent basically run out of moves to the point where you can keep marching your pawn forward, and when it gets close enough, you could actually sacrifice it and then go pick up some of your opponent's enemy pawns. I'll play some moves out because it makes a lot more sense when you see it. So black starts doing all of their pawn moves, now they're stuck, and basically you're just waiting for their king to be forcibly pushed back. You can get your pawn closer to promotion and then eventually just give it up as a sacrifice, go get the rest of the pawns, because usually your opponent will be too slow, and then you will win in terms of being able to promote first. Speaking of passed pawns, that takes me to rule number 4, which is the square rule. The square rule helps you figure out quickly if your king can catch an enemy pawn. Let's say you're playing with the black pieces here. White is trying to get to promote on a8. It's black's turn to move. Do you catch the pawn? There's a really quick way to know, and the way you do it is you draw a diagonal line from the enemy pawn all the way to where it would promote, and then you use that to complete a square. If your king would step into the square, then that means you'll catch the pawn. If it doesn't, you won't. So here, king e5, a5, king d6, a6, king c6, a7, king b7, and you catch the pawn right as it promotes. That brings us to rule number 5, which is activate your king in the endgame. Unlike the opening, there are far fewer pieces in the endgame, so usually your king is not in threat if it's going and adventuring outside. Let me show you this position. If the king is on d4 and white to move, white wins. If the king is on f2 and white to move, it's a draw. Usually, if one side has their king active and the other side doesn't, that is going to mean a win for the side that has the active king. This position is winning for white because the king can go to c5 and attack the pawn on b5 twice. Let's say the black king was more active and instead of being on h7, it was on d6. Then it would have opposition with the king and this position would be a draw. Now let me show you a more complicated example that also illustrates king activity. White to move, should white move rook c1? The answer is no, because if you move rook c1, that forces the white king back, and black's king activity is going to actually help black win this game. You end up in this position, and then the endgame is a little bit complicated, but it is winning for black. The last tip is understanding opposition. In this position, if it's black's turn to move, then white has opposition. That means that black would be the one who is forced to move away. If it was white's turn to move, then that means black has opposition. It feels really abstract, so I'm going to give you an example that shows why that's important. Here's an example where opposition is very handy. If it's white's turn to move, then black has the opposition and black can draw the game. If it's black's turn to move, then white has the opposition and white can actually win the game. This endgame is a little complicated, so I will just simplify it. But let's say it was white to move, the white king would move over, and opposition is so important because it can help you force the enemy king away. Black would continue to chase the white king around, and it'd be impossible for the white king to make progress. Now, if it was black's turn to move in this position, let's say the king would be forced to go to d6 or to f6, then the white king would progress on the opposite side, and this is actually a winning endgame where white will end up being able to promote.
What kind of tactical ideas are interesting and basic to understand that once you understand, you take early leaps in improvement?
Yeah, so it's things like forks, for example, where you attack two pieces at the same time, discovered attacks like checkmates, and again, winning like a queen or other material. Those are probably the two most important ones. Batteries and pins, but I will say that I think that with chess, the more of these patterns you see, the quicker you catch them. And that's how you improve, I think, the most is by learning these basic tactical themes at the beginner levels. The only thing for me that I definitely am doing very frequently when I play is trying to look at my pieces. Are they placed on the optimal squares? Are there better squares? And then once I get past that, like using the basic logic, I start to think about, okay, what pure calculations, like what are the moves that make a lot of sense, and start calculating direct moves. But one of the most basic things that I think that I do that a lot of people actually should do that they don't do is looking at the piece placement and trying to figure out what pieces look like they're on good squares versus bad squares.
Here are my 5 best tips for chess beginners. First of all, play as much chess as possible. Playing really is the best form of training. That's the way you develop your instincts, both positional and tactical. So any playing training is good. Longer games, blitz games against computers, against other humans. Secondly, reading, whether it's books or content on the internet, like videos, watching those. It helps a lot to read about chess, just because you like it, just because you find it interesting, and in the long run it will be very helpful. Number 3, learn the basic mating techniques. Like mating with a queen and a rook, or 2 rooks and queen against just the king, or also rook against the king. It's very useful to know. It gives you a lot of confidence that you can finish the game off with a mate, because often especially in games with beginners, you can play very well, you can reach winning position with many pieces up, but it's sometimes hard to checkmate the opponent. And you see in games, even at the very top level, the mating techniques of two rooks against a king, and also the mating technique of king and rook against just a king. They are very useful in many endgames. Number 4, learn from the old masters. Throughout my career, I feel that it's been very useful, but most of all very interesting to read about how chess has developed over the years, and to look at the games, especially I think the games since the Capablanca Aliekin match in 1927. I think ever since then chess has been played at a very high level, and you can learn a lot from all of the great masters. Plus, of course, again, if you're as interested in chess as I am, you will find it very interesting just to read about it. And lastly, but most importantly, have fun. Chess training, practicing, it should be all about having fun. If you find playing long games, if you find playing quick games, if you find solving exercises, reading chess books, watching videos, if you find all of this very interesting and fun, you will come a long way.
So what are your top 3 favorite openings, please?
I think the classical openings are probably my favorites, like the Rue Lopez or the Sicilian, because there are so many different dynamical, positional, everything kind of possibilities, and learning them at an early age teaches you to play a whole lot of different positions. And one thing that I was taught at an early age was that I should play many different openings, just to broaden my horizons. And I think that's helped me become more of a universal player without any great preferences, because I think that's something that will slow you down and hinder your game.
Hi everybody, my name is Daniil Dubov. I'm chess grandmaster fans ambassador for the FIDE online arena. Both my father and grandfather played chess, and this was exactly the reason why I started playing myself. When I was 6 or 7, my father brought me to my first chess club, where I started my journey. My main advice for the beginners will be quite simple: just to play chess as much as you can and work on chess as much as you can. The good part is that actually it will all be useful. Playing chess, solving puzzles or reading books, nothing will hurt.
Can you tell us a little bit about your newest series of endgames?
I love endgames. I'm very passionate about endgames since my childhood. Basically, I learned a lot already age 6, 7. I started out with rook endgames and then many other different kind of endgames. Also, I was solving a lot of studies, and I believe, looking back, that it improved my chess a lot. And I think it's the key right now that for success to know endgames, because you're entering in the game in the 4th, 5th hour, you're tired, you have all the mess in your head, what had happened before. So you have to have really the knowledge under your skin. So I think it can be very entertainment and engaging. So this is the love and passion I hope I can give through my Chessable courses.
Yeah, I think you've definitely succeeded at that. So if you have to give advice to a couple of young chess players, or maybe to the adult improvers, if you have to give a choice, what do you think is most important for their improvement? Tactics, openings, strategy, endgames? I mean, I've heard Yasser Serouin say that learning endgames is like cheating, because you can work your way backwards from a winning position. What would be your recommendation?
Well, it's a little bit like that if you ask that during the day, what do you think? What is more important, to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner? I mean, the thing is, you need everything. You have to stay healthy in your chess. First of all, you have to have a good mindset. You have to have this well-being, what you feel about your chess. And whenever you feel that your opening is going down and you feel unbalanced and insecure, go to learn openings. If you feel that in the middle game you did something wrong in your games, go and focus on middle game. If there's something end game you say, oh, it's something wrong what I'm doing, I messed up this rook end game, then go to end game, because self-confidence is one of the most important things to be able to convert your knowledge into practical success. And this is why I believe that it's very good if you alternate. For me, I think for amateur players, for example, opening is the least important. But of course, you have to know more or less what you're doing in the opening. I was always the middle game person, where complications, and somehow you get along over there.